Many of you will probably have considered fitting an alternator to your tractor, but not quite sure how to do it. Well, it's quite simple, and I'll go through it here. The first step is the battery. Your tractor will have come out the factory positive earth, and that needs changing. It's not quite as simple as changing the terminals over because they're slightly different sizes. You might have to swap the terminals on the end of the lead. But your battery leads are probably 40 years old. This would be a good time to treat it to a pair of new leads. I use 40mm square cable, and you want one lead from the negative terminal down to the ground terminal of the starter motor, and another lead from the positive down to the battery terminal on the starter motor. When you've done that, disconnect the battery while we carry out the rest of the operations. When you come to fit the alternator, which goes here, the alternator is mounted with two small brackets. That's the original bracket, and I've made a new one out of some 40mm by 5mm angle iron. Basically, it's just a mirror image because the Dynamo was a lot longer and things have moved forward, so you need to make a shorter bracket. I've took the dipstick out of the way so you can see better, but the alternator mounts there, your new bracket here, and then the two original wires that went to the Dynamo, the large one, the brown and yellow one, goes onto the big terminal of the alternator, and the small one, the brown and blue or green, difficult to tell after 40 years, goes onto the small warning lamp terminal of the alternator. I've just taken a close-up shot here of the alternator so you can see where the wires go. They're the original Dynamo wires now fitted to the alternator. This is the alternator that I fit to most of my tractors. It's a Lucas ACR unit fitted to vehicles in the UK in the 1970s and 80s, quite common here. If you're overseas you might have to improvise. But the two reasons I fit this alternator: it's relatively low output. This is an ACR 16 and it produces 16 amps. If you look here, you can see the width of this part here. The wider that is, the more current they produce. They do a 17, 18 and a 20. But I go for a relatively low output so that when it's fitted to the Nuffield wiring loom, it doesn't burn it out. You might come to your tractor one morning and it's flat, and you jump start the tractor and the alternator goes to full output to charge your battery up. A large alternator could produce problems. The other reason I fit this is the shaft at the front is the same diameter as the Nuffield Dynamo. Most car alternators come with a quite small unsuitable pulley like that to take a 10mm belt. If you try and fit that to your Nuffield, the belt will shred in a day or two because of the relatively small diameter. The original Nuffield Dynamo has a 3.5-inch pulley, and if yours is like that with a separate tin fan, that will go straight on to the alternator in place because it's the same diameter through. The very early Nuffields had this pulley fitted where the fins are integral with the pulley. Now I'm not sure about whether they'll fit. The shaft diameter will be the same. You might have to machine the fins off the back or take the tin fan off the alternator and fit it. I'm not sure, but the shaft diameter is the same, so it makes it quite easy to fit the correct pulley. Now we come to where the regulator was fitted. This tractor's already been converted to alternator, so I've just stripped the wires off so that you can see what's going on. Come into the regulator box. We've got quite a few wires here. There's 4 brown ones. One will go to the battery, one to the alternator, one to the ignition, and probably one to the lights. They are all connected to the regulator. What you do with them 4 is just twist them all together like that and put a big terminal block over them. You can solder them if you want, but if the wires have gone black or got a lot of oil on them, you can't do that. Just put a terminal block on like that and tighten them up. This tractor's been like this for several years, so it does work. Then there's a black earth wire, just two thin wires for the earth. Just ignore that. And then you come to these 2 wires two thin brown wires. The tracer colours are brown and yellow, and I think brown and green. One goes to the ignition light, one goes to the field terminal of the alternator. Join them together with a terminal block, and that's all you need to do. You join all the thick wires together, ignore the earth, and join the two thin wires together. Earlier tractors have the regulator behind the dashboard, and it's a different regulator and the wiring is different. I'll give you a good look at this one. On the regulator we have the letters D, E, A and F, and that's nothing to do with being hard of hearing. The letters stand for Dynamo, Earth, A is the battery and F is field for the dynamo again. Similar process with this regulator. We take the D and the A wire and connect them together. They're the power wires. The earth wire once again we disregard, but the field wire, this is where it's different with this one. There is no bulb on the dashboard to connect to this. So if you're converting an early tractor, you'll need to put a little bulb, 2.2 watts or higher. The higher the wattage, the quicker the alternator will start charging when you start the engine up, because it relies on the current through the bulb to energise the alternator. But you'll have to fit a little bulb somewhere connected to the ignition switch, and then connect it to this F wire, and that will go to the alternator and energise it. Okay then, so now we've changed the battery leads, we've fitted the alternator, we've changed the wiring where necessary. The next bit is to reconnect the battery. Now be ready for a spark if you've got something wrong. And what I tend to do before I put the terminals on is I just stand back, take a breath and blow across the battery, and then if there's any explosive gases there, they've gone. And then you can carefully and tentatively reattach the battery. Don't clamp it up tight, just slip the terminal on. If everything's alright, start her up. If you've got a voltmeter, that's a good idea. You should see that it's charging. And that's all it's done. That's all there is to changing your Nuffield from Dynamo to alternator.